If you think clemency is just a legal technicality, what you're about to see will change that forever. A former Biden administration official sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee and admitted, through her own memos, that she recommended sparing the lives of all 40 people on federal death row, including a man who gunned down 9 black churchgoers because of their race, a man who massacred 11 Jewish worshippers in a Pittsburgh synagogue, and a serial rapist who murdered 2 little girls, ages 8 and 9. And when Senator Hawley put the victims' photographs on that table and asked her to look at them, she hid behind procedure. This is what happens when the machinery of justice gets used not to protect the innocent, but to protect the monsters who destroyed them. Let's get into it.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on that note, Ms. Binsky, and for everybody who's here, all of the victims, thank you for being here. Thank you for standing up and telling your stories. Ms. Boss, thank you for being here and for telling us about your daughter. I'm sorry for what all of you have been through. So I want to say thank you and honor your voices and honor what you're doing. Ms. Oyer, if I could just turn to you. You were President Biden's pardon attorney, is that correct?
I was the Justice Department's pardon attorney.
You made clemency recommendations to the White House whether or not to pardon inmates, is that correct?
My job was to make clemency recommendations.
And in that capacity, you recommended that the President of the United States, Joe Biden, grant clemency to all 40 federal death row inmates, all of them, clear them out, correct?
Sir, as I told Chairman Grassley, I'm not free to discuss the recommendations.
Well, that's what your memo says.
President.
I mean, we have your memo. Your memo of November 4th, 2024 says, and I quote, disparity and undue severity of sentence, which are present in many, if not all of these cases, have been recognized as grounds for clemency. And you went on to recommend in that memo and a series of other memos that are now recorded and public record that the President of the United States grant clemency to murderers, rapists, and the most horrible offenders, all of them, clear death row completely out. I'm amazed you've been called here today. I'm absolutely amazed by it. But let's just talk about the people who you recommended. You talk about honoring victims. The people who you recommended get clemency and live at the expense and sufferance of taxpayers for the rest of their lives. Let's start with Dylann Roof. Dylann was a neo-Nazi who murdered 9 African-American worshipers at a Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina, 2015. Do you remember this case?
I do remember it very well.
I would hope you did. Here's his victims. You want to look at them? There they are. 9 of them at a Bible study in a church, killed in cold blood. The DOJ knew from day one that he had decided, I'm going to quote from the prosecutors, decided to attack African Americans because of their race. He further decided to attack African American worshipers in a black church in order to make his attack more notorious. More notorious. And yet you recommended that he be granted clemency, live at the expense of taxpayers for the rest of his life, substitute your judgment for that of the American judicial system. Do you stand by that recommendation today?
Sir, I'm not going to comment on the recommendations that I made, but I can tell you that Mr. Roof is going to die in prison as...
He's going to live in prison for a very long time because of you, because of your recommendations. And here's what you said in your memo of October 30th, 2024. You said that actually Roof is not a compelling candidate for clemency, but you recommended it anyway. Why? Because he suffered from anxiety, you said. Right? He suffered from anxiety. Did it ever occur to you that maybe the family of his victims might suffer a little bit of anxiety because he marched into their church and murdered them in cold blood because he was an incredible racist and he wanted to get on TV?
Sir.
Do you regret it?
I'm not going to comment on the recommendations
Do you regret it?
that I made to the president.
Let's talk about Robert Bowers, a man who regularly spewed such vile hatred of Jews. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. He barged into a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018 and he shot everybody he could find, killing 11 innocent people who were there to worship. A federal jury in Pittsburgh unanimously recommended the death sentence after finding him guilty on 63 counts. Here they are. They're his victims. Take a good look. You recommended clemency for this person who went in and killed these people just because they're Jews. The other guy killed people just because they're black. This guy killed people just because they're Jews. A jury recommended that he be sentenced to death, and you substituted your judgment for theirs, and now he's going to live. Are you proud of that?
Sir, what I am proud of is the fact that I took my job as pardon attorney extremely seriously.
Apparently not seriously enough. You certainly didn't take the victims seriously. Then there's Jorge Avila Torres, who wasn't just a murderer. He was a serial killer and a rapist.
Sir, you're
Here
not-
is who he assaulted and killed. He sexually assaulted and killed 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and 9-year-old Crystal Tobias in a Chicago suburb in 2005. And then 4 years after that, he committed another murder. He slaughtered a fellow service member, Navy Petty Officer Amanda Snell, in 2009 while she was in her barracks. That's what he did. And you recommended clemency for this individual, and now he'll live his life at the expense of taxpayers because you substituted your judgment for that of the American judicial system, jury, judges, the whole lot, and yet you're here to tell us that you're somehow a victim? I don't think so, Ms. Oyer. I think your judgment is astoundingly terrible. I'm amazed that this side of the aisle has called you, and I just ask my friends on this side of the aisle, do you agree with this? Is this what you want? Do you want these people to be pardoned and live at the expense of taxpayers for their whole lives? Do you want to excuse the murders of African-American churchgoers? Do you want to excuse the murders of Jews in their synagogues? Do you want to excuse the murders of these children? Because that's what she did, and now she's online hawking products to try to make money off of it. I see you've got your own website where you put your face on baseball caps and mugs, thelawyeroyer.com. You're trying to make money on this?
Sir,
This is unbelievable, Ms. Oyer, and yet you say you're a victim? These are the victims. And you helped victimize them. And what you're doing is wrong. I hope every member on this side of the aisle will repudiate what you have done and what you stand for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir, I assume that your questions directed at me were rhetorical and that you're giving
They're not
a speech.
rhetorical at all. I asked you to respond and you said you wouldn't. So what I did is I read to you what you have said. I quoted verbatim. And I'm happy to keep doing it. In fact, I'd ask now, Mr. Chairman, that this report, Restoring and Strengthening the Federal Death Penalty Report, be entered into the record. It contains information regarding Ms. Oyer, her recommendations, and the track record of all of it. The written records are here. I ask to be entered into the record.
It'll be, Ms. Hoyer, take a minute to respond if you want to.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. I, under President Biden, just like under President Trump, had a job to do, which was to make recommendations to the president about how to best accomplish their clemency objectives. I put the utmost effort into doing that in a way that was consistent with the interests of the justice system and all of its stakeholders, which includes crime victims, as well as defendants, as well as family members, as well as judges, as well as prosecutors, all criminal justice system stakeholders. The process that I presided over was one that was beyond reproach. What's happening now with clemency is an absolute disgrace, and I'm sorry that I can't answer the questions about the specific recommendations in this public setting, but I would be glad to meet with any members of this committee who have concerns privately to discuss to the extent I can what your
Privately,
concerns
why don't you
are.
meet with the victims' families? Here's the disgrace.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ashcroft, welcome back to the Senate. You knew Jim Comey?
Let me tell you what most people missed while watching that hearing. They watched it as a confrontation, a senator yelling at a bureaucrat, photographs on a table, voices rising. But what actually happened in that room was something more consequential than political theater, and I want to walk you through it piece by piece. Start with clemency itself, because if you don't understand what it is, you can't understand why this matters. Clemency exists because no legal system is perfect. Juries make mistakes, sentences get handed down unevenly, and sometimes the facts that would have changed a verdict only surface years later. The pardon attorney's job is to review those cases and make recommendations to the president about where the system may have gotten it wrong. That is a legitimate function, and it has existed in this country since the founding. But here is where Rosalind Oyer's memos stop being normal and start being something else entirely. She didn't flag a handful of disputed cases where new evidence emerged or where the trial record raised serious questions. She recommended clemency for all 40 people on federal death row, all 40I, using a framework built around what she called disparity and undue severity of sentence. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because that phrase actually refers to something real. Federal research has documented for decades that death sentences are handed down unevenly, that race, geography, and the quality of your legal representation all affect whether you end up on death row or not. That is a genuine problem with the system, and serious people across the political spectrum have argued about it for years. But here is what Oyer's framework does that should trouble every person watching this, regardless of where they stand on the death penalty. It uses a systemic critique as a blanket justification, and in doing so, it collapses the distinction between cases where the system failed and cases where it didn't. Dylan Roof is not a victim of sentencing disparity. He walked into Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, sat with a Bible study group for an hour, and then shot 9 people dead because they were black. He said so himself. A federal jury, after hearing every piece of evidence, unanimously recommended death. There was no disputed evidence, no uneven application of the law, no question about what happened or why. And yet his name was on that list. So was Robert Bowers, who walked into a Pittsburgh synagogue and killed 11 Jewish worshippers. So was Jorge Avila Torres, who sexually assaulted and murdered 2 little girls, 8 and 9 years old, and then killed a Navy servicewoman in her barracks 4 years later. What Oyer's framework did was take the legitimate language of reform and apply it to people where reform was never the issue. That's not a technicality. That is a judgment call, and it was the wrong one. Now let's talk about the moment in that hearing that I don't think people are discussing enough. When Oyer finally got to speak, she said the process she presided over was beyond reproach. She said she'd be happy to meet privately with any senator who had concerns. And Senator Hawley said, "Don't meet with me privately. Meet with the victims' families sitting in that room right now." She had no answer for that. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because it reveals something important about how accountability fails inside large institutions. Oyer wasn't lying when she said she followed a process. She probably did follow a process. There were memos, legal frameworks, review steps, documented rationales. Process is the thing bureaucracies produce when they want to be unaccountable without appearing to be. It creates the impression of rigor while insulating the person who made the actual judgment from having to defend that judgment directly. Think about what that means for the people in that gallery. A woman who lost her daughter to a man on that list sat in a Senate hearing room and watched the person who recommended he live out his days at taxpayer expense explain that she can't discuss it publicly, she can discuss it privately, with the senators, on her terms, at a time of her choosing. But not here, not now, not in front of the people whose lives were destroyed by the decisions she made. That is not a procedural technicality. That is a failure of moral accountability. And it happens because the clemency system, almost uniquely in American law, has almost no mechanism to catch it. The pardon power is nearly absolute. The president can grant clemency to anyone for any reason. Congress cannot override it, and the courts generally won't touch it. That means the people who advise on pardons carry enormous informal power with almost no formal accountability. And when the reasoning they use fails, when a framework designed for genuine edge cases gets applied to mass murderers with no disputed facts, there is no alarm that goes off, no inspector general with jurisdiction, no oversight committee with teeth. What you saw in that hearing was Senator Hawley trying to create accountability through sheer public pressure, because the institutional mechanisms to do it simply don't exist. You can think his tactics were too aggressive and still recognize that the underlying problem is real. The clemency system in this country runs almost entirely on trust. Trust that the people making recommendations are exercising genuine moral judgment, not applying ideological frameworks wholesale to everyone on a list. When that trust breaks down, the only check left is a senator with photographs and a microphone. And that should make all of us uncomfortable, regardless of which party put those names on the list. It fails because the systems designed to catch bad decisions quietly stop working, and nobody notices until someone walks into a hearing room carrying the faces of the dead.